The studio lights were unforgiving. Cold, bright, and calculated, just like the tone of the debate that was about to unfold. Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett sat poised at the far end of the glass desk, her expression a mix of confidence and sharpened disdain. Across from her sat Ibrahim Traoré, calm, composed, yet unmistakably alert. He had been invited to Washington, D.C., to speak on global cooperation, but this was no friendly summit. This was a televised clash, and everyone watching knew it. From the first question, the tension was undeniable. "Let's be honest," Jasmine said, barely concealing a smirk. "You may claim to be a reformer, Mr. Traoré. But to many Americans, you represent instability. You represent chaos." Her words sliced through the air, designed to provoke. The studio fell silent, waiting to see if he'd flinch. Traoré didn't. He leaned forward, hands folded, gaze locked on hers, not with aggression, but with unshakable calm. "No," he said evenly, his voice low but firm. "I represent change." The contrast between them was glaring. Jasmine had built a reputation on fiery speeches and political theater. Traoré, by contrast, carried a quiet gravity, one shaped not by talking points, but by leading under fire, by facing down coups, by walking into rooms where he wasn't welcomed, and staying. Jasmine raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Change? Or disruption? Be honest with us. You seized power. You overthrew a system. That's not change, that's chaos with a new face." Traoré tilted his head slightly, his tone now edged with steel. "When systems fail to protect the people, change becomes a duty. Not all revolutions are violent. But silence in the face of suffering? That's the real chaos, Congresswoman." The moderator tried to steer the conversation back to the topic of international aid, but it was too late. The spark had been lit. On social media, the clip of their exchange was already trending. Two worlds colliding, one rooted in American skepticism, the other in African defiance. And both of them knew, this was just the beginning. Outside the studio, the debate had already spilled into the streets, digitally and physically. Hashtags like #ChaosOrChange, #Traoré vs Crockett, and #The New Voice dominated trending lists across X, TikTok, and YouTube. Inside, however, the atmosphere turned colder as Jasmine leaned in. "You speak of duty," she said, tapping her pen against the desk. "But who gave you the authority to decide what your people needed? Democracy means elections, not coups." Her tone wasn't just confrontational, it was condescending. A lecture disguised as concern. Traoré didn't blink. He didn't look to the moderator, the cameras, or the audience. He looked at her. In theory, yes. But in reality, what happens when those elections are orchestrated by foreign interests? When ballots come with conditions, and aid comes with strings, he asked. Jasmine opened her mouth to respond, but Traoré continued, his voice still calm but gaining resonance. "You call it a coup. My people called it survival." The room shifted. The moderator glanced at the producer. Even the audience behind the cameras, mostly American, sensed the gravity. This wasn't a man defending power. This was a man defending legitimacy earned through fire, not votes. "I didn't ask for a seat at this table," Traoré said, turning toward the camera now. "I took it, because no one was offering one. Not to us. Not to Burkina Faso. Not to any African nation that dared speak without permission." Jasmine scoffed, "Oh please. That's textbook justification for authoritarianism." "No," Traoré said. "That's a statement of fact. And it frightens people, because we've stopped asking." Her expression twitched. Just for a second. The line had struck something. The moderator cut in, attempting to steer the topic toward diplomatic cooperation. "Let's pivot to foreign aid programs." But the tension wouldn't break. Jasmine crossed her arms. So what? You'd rather let your people starve than accept help from us? Traoré's reply was immediate. I'd rather teach them to grow their own food than train them to wait at someone else's door. Gasps. Audible from behind the cameras. For a brief moment, even Jasmine couldn't speak. And Traoré, without raising his voice, had just taken control of the room. The control room behind the glass erupted into frantic whispers. Producers gestured toward the clock, debating whether to cut to commercial. But the network knew what they had, a viral moment in real time. On screen, Jasmine Crockett tried to recover. She leaned back, arms still crossed, forcing a tight smile. So you reject aid? Reject support? That's noble, until drought hits. Until famine comes knocking. Her tone had shifted. Less confident now, more accusatory, even bitter. Traoré didn't flinch. I reject dependency, he said. There it was again, that precision. His words weren't just counterpunches. They were foundations. And as he spoke, viewers across the country weren't just listening, they were leaning in. You want to talk drought? Traoré continued. Let's talk about the water projects that were shelved because they didn't align with donor interests. Let's talk about foreign contracts that strip land from farmers to grow biofuel for Europe, not food for Africans. Don't lecture me on famine, Congresswoman. We know hunger, not as a campaign talking point, but as a neighbor. The moderator let out a nervous breath, visibly unsure whether to intervene or let the moment ride. But Jasmine was already talking again, this time louder. You're painting us as villains. America has poured billions into Africa, into health, education, infrastructure. And you sit here, disrespecting that? I respect every dollar, Traoré replied without hesitation. But I also know the price tag attached. Some of those dollars came with military bases. Some came with regime preferences. Aid with a leash is not generosity, it's leverage. The studio quieted again. And somewhere in Middle America, in living rooms and college dorms and political war rooms, people were rethinking everything they thought they knew about the so-called chaos in Africa. Jasmine tried to pivot. Then what do you want, Mr. Traoré? If not aid, if not partnership, then what? His answer came like a drumbeat. Respect. She blinked. Not permission. Not pity. Just, respect. For the first time, Jasmine didn't interrupt. Because for the first time, she didn't know how. The silence after Traoré's last word felt louder than the debate itself. Even Jasmine Crockett, known for her sharp comebacks and lightning-fast rebuttals, didn't jump in. Respect. It was such a simple demand, yet so rare when it came from someone like him, on a stage like this. The moderator, sensing the weight of the moment, tried to break the tension. Let's shift gears to the broader global narrative. Congressman Traoré, do you believe the West has failed Africa? But Traoré didn't shift. He stayed locked on Jasmine. No, he said. The West hasn't failed Africa. It simply succeeded, in serving itself. That line sent tremors through every earpiece in the studio. Commentators in waiting rooms sat forward. The director didn't dare cut away. Traoré wasn't performing, he was unraveling something deeper. I'm not here to shame America, he continued, turning slightly toward the moderator now. I admire many things about this country, its innovation, its resilience, its free press. But admiration does not mean submission. Jasmine finally spoke up. You speak of submission, yet your country relies on international markets, aid, and diplomacy. Isn't that hypocrisy? Traoré nodded once. No. It's honesty. We operate in a system we didn't design, but we've learned how to survive within it. What I reject is the idea that survival must always come with obedience. That made Jasmine snap. That's dangerous thinking. That leads to isolation, poverty, irrelevance. Traoré's eyes sharpened. You confuse independence with isolation. Our poverty is not from disobedience, it's from extraction. From trade deals written in foreign boardrooms. From intellectual property laws that block our medicine production. From media that labels us chaotic every time we demand more than scraps. This time, he didn't wait for her response. You say I represent chaos? No, Congresswoman. I represent the end of silence. And silence, I assure you, is what kept the world comfortable while Africa bled quietly. Gasps again. Even some on Jasmine's own staff, standing behind the set, exchanged looks. Traoré wasn't simply debating. He was revealing, and it was making people uncomfortable in all the right ways. For a brief moment, the network cut to a split screen. On the left, Jasmine Crockett sat upright, her jaw tight, eyes locked forward. On the right, Ibrahim Traoré leaned back slightly, composed, his posture radiating patience, not arrogance, not aggression. Just quiet control. Millions were watching now. Clips of the confrontation had already flooded the internet, and hashtags like #TraoréSpeaks and #TheNewOrder were trending faster than any political segment in months. Back in the studio, Jasmine tried a different strategy. So what's your plan then? She asked, voice thinly veiled in sarcasm. If you're not asking for support and you're rejecting cooperation, are you just going to build your revolution alone? Traoré didn't hesitate. Not alone. With those willing to listen, not dictate. She narrowed her eyes. Meaning? Meaning, he said, we're already building alliances, not around charity, but around sovereignty. Countries tired of conditional friendships. Tired of signing agreements with pens dipped in compromise. Jasmine's voice sharpened. You're aligning yourself with adversaries of the United States. I'm aligning myself with those who treat us as equals, he replied. If that makes me your adversary, ask yourself why. The words lingered in the air. Across the country, think tanks scrambled to draft responses. Foreign policy analysts began whispering about a new bloc forming, one led not by wealth, but by defiance. A continent rising not with weapons, but with conviction. Jasmine shifted uncomfortably. You think speeches like this make you noble? She asked, her voice now edged with something different, almost personal. This is how demagogues rise. Traoré smiled, not mockingly, but with quiet certainty. No, he said. This is how dignity rises. In rooms where it was never invited. The audience in the studio didn't applaud. They couldn't. This wasn't entertainment. It was a reckoning. And everyone knew it. Behind the scenes, the control room debated cutting to break. But the director said one word, no. Because they all understood. History was being spoken aloud. The tension had shifted. What started as a debate now felt like something else, a confrontation between two worldviews, two truths colliding under the weight of centuries. Jasmine Crockett adjusted her mic, her voice steady but colder now. You talk a lot about dignity, she said. But let's not forget, your rise to power wasn't through ballots. It was through boots. You came to that stage not because the people voted, but because your soldiers cleared the path. Traoré's expression didn't change, but the intensity in his eyes sharpened. Yes, he said plainly. And when the ballots were rigged, when the courts were bought, when the people begged for protection from corruption and no one answered, someone had to stand. Jasmine scoffed. That sounds like every strongman's excuse. Traoré leaned forward slightly. And dismissing our pain sounds like every empire's habit. Boom. The audience behind the cameras stirred. A few staff members near the control desk exchanged glances. Even the moderator, who had been trying to keep the discussion civil, fell silent. I did not come here to justify every choice we've made, Traoré continued. But I came to make one thing clear: Burkina Faso is not a child state. We do not need lectures. We need room to breathe. To fail. To learn. To grow. Like every nation once did before it claimed to be civilized. Jasmine tried to jump in, but he kept going. You call me chaotic, he said, his voice rising, not shouting, but undeniable. But what is more chaotic than colonizing half the world, extracting its resources, destabilizing its leaders, and then blaming them for the mess you left behind? There was no smirk on his face. No pride. Just truth. This isn't chaos, Traoré finished. This is repair. It only looks chaotic to those who built comfort on our silence. Now the studio was completely still. Somewhere off-screen, someone whispered, "My God." Because it was no longer a question of who was right. It was a matter of whether the audience could accept what was real. The air in the studio had turned dense, so much so that the cameras couldn't hide it. Even the lighting felt different, harsher on Jasmine's face, warmer on Traoré's. Viewers at home felt it too. The chat feeds were exploding. Newsrooms began preparing emergency reaction panels. This was no longer a debate, it was a televised turning point. Jasmine leaned forward, this time with a quieter, more deliberate tone. "You're charismatic, I'll give you that," she said. "But words alone don't build nations. And revolutionary charm fades fast when people are hungry. Do you really think passion will replace food, electricity, healthcare?" It was a fair question, and a trap. A classic pivot to practicality, hoping to reduce ideals to logistical failures. But Traoré didn't flinch. "No," he said. "But dignity feeds people too. So does ownership. So does purpose." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Let me tell you what chaos looks like to me," Traoré continued. "It looks like farmers growing food for foreign markets while their children starve. It looks like doctors trained in Western universities never returning home because they can't find jobs that pay a living wage. It looks like us dying of curable diseases because medicine is patented behind walls of profit." He paused. "You want to talk about hunger? We're not hungry because we failed. We're hungry because the system succeeded, just not for us." Jasmine bit her lip. Traoré leaned into the mic again. "We've started over before. After colonization. After coups. After betrayals dressed as partnerships. And we'll do it again, this time not to catch up to the world, but to rebuild it in our own shape." From the back of the studio, someone clapped, just once. It wasn't enough to shift the tone, but it was enough to prove something: not everyone in the room was against him. "You think this is just rhetoric," he said, this time directing his words to the camera. "But the young people watching? They know. They feel it. Not just in Africa. Everywhere where dignity has been sold cheap." He turned back to Jasmine one last time. "And that's what you fear, isn't it? Not chaos. Not hunger. But that we might rise, and not need permission to do it." Jasmine didn't answer. Because how do you argue with a man who's not trying to win the debate, but trying to end the old one altogether? The network's producers were panicking now, though quietly, behind glass. Viewer engagement was skyrocketing. Clips of Traoré's takedowns were going viral mid-broadcast. News tickers began flashing phrases like "unexpected showdown" and "Traoré's rhetoric shakes studio." Even rival networks started cutting into their regular programming just to quote the moment. Jasmine Crockett sensed the shift too. She wasn't just battling a guest anymore, she was battling gravity. And it was pulling away from her. She adjusted her posture, trying to reclaim control. "Let's be honest, Mr. Traoré," she said, forcing a tight smile. "You sound good, but governing isn't performance. It's process. You speak of change, but change needs checks, rules, institutions. Do you have those? Or just slogans? That landed. It was the kind of critique that audiences could respect, a call to substance. Traoré nodded slowly. You're right. Change without structure collapses. But structure without justice? That's a cage. He let it breathe. Our institutions were inherited, not designed. They were crafted for control, not liberation. So yes, we are building, and yes, it's messy. But I'd rather live in the dust of construction than in the silence of a gilded prison. Jasmine tried again. But where's your plan? He leaned forward. We've launched public agricultural cooperatives. We've nationalized mineral contracts that exploited our people. We've created educational networks in villages where maps used to forget us. You call it chaos. We call it beginning. There was a hush in the studio. And then came the unexpected moment. A member of Jasmine's own campaign staff, standing off camera, stepped forward slightly and whispered something into her earpiece. She froze. Traoré caught it. And smiled faintly. You feel it, don't you? He said. Not just you, everyone watching. The shift. The discomfort. That's not chaos. That's clarity. It only feels dangerous when people start seeing what they weren't supposed to. Jasmine opened her mouth. Then closed it. For the first time in the entire segment, she had no line prepared. The silence from Jasmine Crockett was louder than any retort. The audience, both in studio and across the country, could sense it. Not defeat, exactly, but disruption. She hadn't expected Traoré to come with statistics, with stories, with steel in his voice and purpose in his words. And now he wasn't just a guest on her network. He was the moment. Traoré turned slightly in his chair, not smugly, but with the poise of someone who'd been underestimated, and had planned for it. I came here to talk policy, he said, voice quieter now. But what we uncovered was deeper than legislation. We've touched on the core of a global sickness, where value is measured in obedience, and visibility is granted only to those who play by someone else's script. He turned to Jasmine. You're a product of this system. I don't fault you for defending it. But I'm not here to burn it down. I'm here to remind it, that it's not eternal. Jasmine straightened slightly, attempting to recover. And what makes you think you are the one to rewrite it? Traoré didn't blink. I'm not the one, he replied. I'm just one of many. Across Africa. Latin America. Southeast Asia. Even right here in America. People who've decided silence isn't safety anymore. That being polite gets us nowhere. That our children deserve a future authored by their own hands, not one handed to them, pre-approved. The moderator tried to steer the show back on track. Congresswoman Crockett, do you have a closing response? Jasmine hesitated. Her lips parted, but no words followed. Across the screen, the audience saw something unusual, a moment where power hesitated, and truth stood still. Traoré, sensing the opening, delivered the final blow, not with aggression, but with grace. I don't expect to convince everyone, he said. But I didn't come for agreement. I came for acknowledgement. That we exist. That we won't disappear. That we're not background noise to a conversation we've never been invited to. He glanced toward the camera, eyes steady. And if that makes me chaos, then maybe it's time the world remembered what order really cost. The screen faded to a wide shot. The room was still. No applause. No outro music. Just the hum of reality setting in. The broadcast ended, but the shockwaves had only begun. Within hours, clips of Traoré's appearance dominated every platform: YouTube, X, TikTok, cable news panels. Hashtags like hashtag Traoré vs Crockett, hashtag This Is Not Chaos, and hashtag Change Has a Name trended globally. His quiet intensity, his refusal to flinch, and the disarming precision of his words made even his critics pause. Inside campaign war rooms and embassy offices, advisors scrambled to assess the damage, or the shift. Jasmine Crockett's team remained silent. Her account posted a carefully worded statement about valuing all voices, but it landed flat. The internet had already decided. She came armed with assumptions, and left with none of her armor intact. Meanwhile, Traoré flew back to Ouagadougou to a hero's welcome. Crowds lined the streets not because he won an argument, but because he had said what they'd been aching to hear for generations. At a community gathering days later, Traoré stood before farmers, students, and workers under a makeshift pavilion. He didn't mention Jasmine by name, not out of respect, but because the point had never been about her. "I wasn't there to humiliate anyone," he said. "I was there to represent everyone who's ever been talked down to, laughed at, or ignored, just because they dared to imagine something bigger." He looked out at the crowd. "Some say I brought chaos. But I say I brought the truth, and the truth only looks like chaos to those who profit from confusion." A woman in the front row shouted, "You made us proud." Traoré smiled. "I didn't make you proud. I just reminded the world of what you already are." Back in the United States, something unexpected began to stir. Young activists quoted his words. University students studied his strategy. Even late-night comedians, normally allergic to foreign affairs, began referencing the guy who shut down Congresswoman Crockett without raising his voice. But it wasn't about going viral. It was about leaving a mark. In the weeks that followed, Jasmine Crockett returned to the screen. Sharper. Humbled. But changed. In an interview with a major news outlet, she said, "I didn't expect that conversation to go the way it did. But maybe I needed to lose control of the narrative, to finally hear one I've ignored." When asked if she'd sit with Traoré again, she paused. "Absolutely," she said. "But next time, I'll listen first." And somewhere across the ocean, Traoré smiled, not out of victory, but because that's where real change begins. Sometimes change doesn't shout. It doesn't march in with fanfare or flags. Sometimes, it sits calmly across the table from power. And refuses to flinch. Ibrahim Traoré didn't win that night because he was louder. He won because he was unshaken. Because truth, when spoken without fear, doesn't need to be aggressive. It just needs to be heard. Jasmine Crockett tried to define him as chaos, as disruption, as noise. But what she encountered was clarity, conviction, and purpose. She came expecting a debate. She got a reminder that voices once ignored don't stay quiet forever. This wasn't about two leaders clashing. It was about one of them refusing to be erased. And in that moment, on live TV, Traoré didn't just answer a politician. He answered history.